What's going on, everybody? Hotep to the family. Ashe to all my people out there. Welcome back to another episode of My Unapologetic Perspective here on the Mighty Motivation Network. This is the podcast where we give our point of view of controversial topics from our experience, Black history, and our knowledge as African Americans. In the words of Maya Angelou, do your best until you know better, and when you know better, do better. So it's important to search for information to discover what you don't know so you can discover your best you. I'm your host, Martre Baker Stevens, and to the right of me is Shaquan Battle.
Yep.
And to the right of him is Jerome Battle.
What's up?
How are y'all feeling? Y'all good?
Good.
That's good. We want to appreciate everybody that's been commenting, everybody that's been giving us their feedback, everybody that's watched on YouTube, everybody that watched the Facebook, everybody that tunes in on Instagram. We love each and every last one of you, and thank you for all your support. And we hope that you continue to search for information to discover what you don't know so you can discover your best you. This podcast is not to be correct. It's to create perspective, to create open conversations, for people to do more research about history, to do more history, do more research about themselves as we go in.
I think that might be one thing people missed this week about the episode that we dropped.
Mm-hmm.
Was this podcast is not to be correct. It's to provoke thought.
Absolutely. Couple of current events happened. The wrongfully accused murderers of Malcolm X were exonerated. It's not anybody that in the Black community that follows history knows this wasn't a surprise. There's been speculation that those two weren't even present during Malcolm X's murder. Pops, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's long overdue, actually. I mean, I think everybody expected that was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Especially with the new documentary coming out that showed who was possible murderer could have been and who all were a part of that conspiracy, even though we know what we're going to get into today about who actually probably did set up the murder or had a hand in that murder.
I think that's probably more important than who actually committed the murder.
Right, because we always know the person who committed was probably a patsy, so it had to come from somewhere higher than the person that actually did the shooting.
And that's symbolic of when we talk about Martin Luther King's assassination,
Mm-hmm.
as well. There's always the person that, as you say, the patsy, the one that's found guilty of pulling the trigger.
Yeah.
But that's not the most important part.
Yeah.
It's the orchestration and the coordination of what happened.
Yeah.
Who was behind it.
Yeah, the word assassination creates a hierarchy in that murder.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Also, Cal Rittenhouse found not guilty. Something that we're not shocked about.
We talked about on the podcast.
Absolutely.
We'll go ahead and admit, though, I was wrong. I said he was going to get found guilty of the gun charge.
Well,
they dismissed that.
Yeah, dismissed
right?
that. Right. Well, we're gonna get into that within the confines of today's topic. Today we're gonna talk about something that Dad's been talking about on this podcast, probably for about the last 10 episodes at least, is fear of African Americans being truthful to white supremacy in America, or African Americans happen to try to be subordinate in America, and how African Americans have been waking up for the past 50, 60 years, and how it's frowned upon those white supremacy groups to try to keep Black people in that subordinate status. Dad, just give us some insight on why that's important when they talk about the history of Blacks just being subordinate.
Yeah, I think it's important in a lot of factors, but let's just talk about from the historical aspect. What is the importance of history, right? So the importance of history is, one, to tell you how things transpired to where they are today. And it's important because you want to know the contributions and things about the people that contributed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important for cultural reasons, heritage reasons, and then to make association to you personally today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always good to know what people in your family or people that look like you did in the past.
Mm-hmm.
For us, we don't really have that.
Yeah.
And it starts with 1619 is the date that history likes to place Blacks in America, enslaved Blacks in America. And I think the enslaved part is most important.
Mm-hmm.
When we know it's documented that black people were in America long before 1619.
Yeah.
However, they were not enslaved in those earlier years.
Mm-hmm.
So the 1619 is important to start that narrative about where black should be in terms of positions in America.
Mm-hmm.
Slaves. So when you first think about blacks in America, you want people to know
Awesome.
they were slaves, right? And then that narrative continues all the way through, even up into the Emancipation Proclamation,
Mm-hmm.
okay, and the Constitution, which in theory does not include us.
Mm-hmm.
So much to the point that it says that all men were created equal, which means we all have the equal right to pursue of happiness,
Mm-hmm.
liberty, and justice, which we know is not true.
Right.
So what we're currently doing right now is trying not to make the United States liars. We're trying to make white America not be liars. We're trying to make that statement become true. So that's what we're fighting.
Absolutely. So when you look at history, I believe shapes not just who we are, but what we relate to and how we able to identify ourselves. When you strip the African of things about themselves and you refuse to teach great things about themselves, but except for how they desegregated baseball,
That's right.
except for how they, desegregated voting or desegregated schools. You only want to pick specific things to talk about so you can have those people identify with that.
With those
But you also refuse to speak about the so-called heroes of this country or the so-called heroic moments of this country, and you refuse to allow yourself to be taken from that superior pedestal
That's right.
that we talk about. So you put blacks into this box and say, well, we're not even going to teach you about slavery. Just know that you were slaves.
Right.
We're not going to teach you about the Emancipation Proclamation. Just know that you were free. We're not going to teach you about the criteria of what happened on 1776. Just know that it freed people.
That's right.
And that creates a image that, okay, that we all were free. It's not true.
That's
That
right.
creates an image that, we all were created equal. We all were doing these things together. And that's simply not true. Even when you look at the wars that we talked about on this podcast, black people participated and some went right back into slavery.
That's right.
It creates a psyche, and you refuse to do that on the opposite end.
That's right.
You talk about George Washington, but you don't want to mention slavery when it comes to George Washington. You don't want to mention when it comes to Thomas Jefferson, because it creates a psyche of white supremacy coming down off the pedestal that they don't want to do. So you remain in the box, we remain on the pedestal, and we'll keep it out there. So we control what you think. Because if we're able to control what you think, we're able to control your actions. So when blacks are being subordinate, you want to control the way that they think. And the way that they think is, we'll start with the one, like you said, the 1619 Project is starting with slavery.
That's right.
So you know that you're slaves. I want you to think like a subordinate slave.
That's right.
That's the first thing. One of the first things they did in slavery was strip you of your name.
Mm-hmm.
I want to strip you of whoever you think you are to whoever I say that you
That's
are,
right.
by giving you my last name.
Right.
So you are contingent on being what I say. You are part of my culture now. You're part of my way of thinking now. And my way of thinking now is your superior. Second part of the reason is, a lot of people don't want to talk about it, but I'll speak on it. Religion.
That's right.
So you use religion as an aspect to say, okay, Jesus died for our sins, but the most segregated place in all of America is High Noon Sunday.
That's right.
So when you do that, they tell you to turn the other cheek. They tell you to go and pray about it. They tell you to practice these things that's in the Bible, and we'll have our heaven here on earth while you look for yours in the sky. The third way, of course, is education that we talked about. Other one is politics. You also have economically, we talked about going back in history on how blacks are denied capital, all of these type of things. We talking about socially being subordinate. You don't want activists to speak out. You don't want people to post about things. You don't want people to tweet about things. And we also music and entertainment. There are people talk about how bad hip hop is. There are rappers that came to the forefront and said, hey, look, we had 20 songs on the album. 10 might have been club songs. 10 might have been talking about police brutality, talking about racism. And the record label said, no, you can't put those 10 on there. And they released the 10 that's the party music.
That's right.
So you have to understand who controls the market. White supremacy. Who controls the movies where black people are predicted and put in a certain box? Hollywood. That's not black culture. That's white America. That's white supremacy.
That's right.
So when you begin to look at all of the statuses that create what we call racial divide, or create what we call the institutionalized of white supremacy, it comes from every layer. There's layers to white supremacy.
That's right.
There are layers to it, and you have to understand how all of it works to make black people identify with the European style structure.
That's right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the two easiest ways to control a person mentally for them to be subordinate, one is change their perspective, which is to tell us that, we were slaves, not that we were here first. And the second is leverage your knowledge. And you just spoke about that by, the church always say, once they got the mind, they got the rest of you. It's going to follow. So that's the two ways to control a person mentally, change their perspective and leverage your knowledge, not what really happened, but your knowledge.
Absolutely. And that's why we can't talk about education enough, because in the educational system, you're taught to stand to do the Pledge of Allegiance before the flag.
Right.
That creates that patriotic person. You're taught to, look at the founding fathers of George Washington and all of those slave masters. You're taught to look at those. We talked about in this podcast. Those are the first pictures you see when you walk into a classroom. You're taught about yourself, which again, they start with slavery. You can't talk about enough when it comes to white supremacy without talking about education. And I believe a lot of people aren't educated on what racism really is, because those are the books that they don't want to be put into the school system.
That's right.
Those are the books that they want to take out, and they want to leave white supremacy ideas in there to keep from what they call woke culture. Woke culture is people who do not subscribe to white supremacy, and they hate woke culture.
The irony of the whole thing is that you have people saying that not only does racism not exist in the United States, that there's no white supremacy, right? The country was founded on white supremacy. Yes. And that's not in theory. That's in reality. This country was founded on white supremacy. And we can even talk about, has anybody ever thought about why did they select Africans as slaves, right? Even when the original slaves came from Angola, but the whole concept was they needed to find somebody that they perceived as being inferior. So it started from that box from the very beginning. Let's get those folks because they're inferior. We believe that the white race is superior. So this country was founded on supremacy. So that means that everything through the laws, the constitution of this country was based on white supremacy. So if you start there, why does it surprise everybody that it still exists? The structure of this country was founded on white supremacy. So everything is geared towards white supremacy. So when you look at the Constitution, people say, well, there's so many amendments because they did not consider any of these things when they wrote the original Constitution. Thus, they didn't think about us because most of the amendments are related to the treatment of black people and minorities, whether it's women, homosexuals, or whatever. That was not considered when they wrote the original Constitution. This country was built on supremacy, whether it's white supremacy or masculinity, whatever it was, this country was founded on that.
Right, absolutely. And you have to go back to the foundations because the word precedent is important here. Whether you talk about the judicial system, whether you talk about the educational system, whether you talk about politics, whether you talk about the economic structure, you have to go back to the word precedent. And what do the word precedent means? In judicial system, it's when the judge has to use older cases of what happened in those cases so things could be consistent. So I can't rule in this favor because 30 years ago, 40 years ago, a similar case was ruled this way. I can't go against that because it will go away against the consistency of the judicial system. So when we look at the system, whether you go back to the 1800s, 1900s, or whatever the case may be, it has been consistently not for black people.
That's right.
So what has happened in 2021, even with the last case, You look at the precedent of it and
That's
say,
right.
this is
has
what
happened
happened in the 1800s. Even in 2021, we have to remain consistent in our judicial system. And the consistent thing is, it's not for black people. That's the thing. But the country has a history of killing and silencing black leaders. Some of the things that we've seen, especially over the past couple of days after that that non-guilty verdict, is black people aren't mad at the fact that Kyle Rittenhouse got found not guilty or he claimed self-defense. The key point is that if it was a black person, everybody in America knows what would have happened. Because we know we could go back and look at things that you said last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that does not line up to how you felt about Kyle Rittenhouse.
That's right.
We can go back and look at that and see the double standard of how people react to certain situations. So when black people again became outraged, white Americans say, hey, what does this have to do with race? Oh, you don't know?
That's right.
You don't know?
That's right.
Go back and look at the last cases.
Right.
Go back and look at a black kid that was shot for just having a gun outside. Go look at what y'all said. Y'all said that, what are the parents? Why is that black kid outside with the gun?
You know, and when we look at the Kyle Rittenhouse case, let's just be 100% transparent real quick. Because my brother called me this morning and said, if Kyle Rittenhouse was black, do you think it would have been a not guilty verdict?
It wouldn't even got
It's a two-part answer. I don't even think he would have been arrested. He would have been killed.
Yeah.
Because if you go back and watch the video footage, this is the other thing. All of this is taking place with video footage, right? So in the video footage, after he shot two people, he's running down the street with a gun around his neck with his hands up. Mm-hmm. Not just a gun, an assault weapon, and running down the street with his hands up, assuming that the police was coming to arrest him. Police rolled right by him.
Ran right by him.
If he was a black person, even without the knowledge that he just shot three people, he would have been shot.
Yeah.
Okay? Just to be clear. So let's just say there was some friendly police officers there at the time, and he wouldn't have been shot. Would he have been found not guilty? As he just said, the precedence has already been set. How has cases before this been judged in the past? In the past, if that was a black suspect, he would have been found guilty. Mm-hmm. We've seen it. When we look at police brutality and cops not only not being charged, but even when they are not being found guilty, is because the precedence has already been set. Mm-hmm. And we know that to be true because it's happening. So we're not talking about in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. We're not talking about 1920s. We're not talking about in the 1800s. We're talking about right now, today. The precedence has already been set. And we can look at this case by case, and we'll be here for weeks talking about this. But it happens so frequently. I was talking to my brother, and he completely forgot about Freddie Gray. Mm-hmm. So when I said Freddie Gray, he was like, Freddie Gray? Oh, wow. It happened so fast that you had another one before you could get resolution on the previous one. It just continues to happen. Yeah. So for the people that said that it's racist for us to think that Kyle Rittenhouse should have been found guilty because he's white, that's not what we're saying.
No, we're talking about equality.
We're talking about equality. That's equality. Not what we're saying.
Equality is if we would have been found guilty, Lil Cal should have been found guilty.
Absolutely. You know, and to put this in another perspective, how many people felt that way about O.J. Simpson when he got found out guilty? So a lot of people said, well, black people were happy that he got found out guilty. I won't say that I was happy that he got found out guilty. What I would say is that they tried to frame a guilty man, because I really do believe O.J. Simpson was guilty. I believe that they tried to frame a guilty man, and they were racist in doing so. Yeah. So not only do you already have them, but you want to make sure that you got them so badly that you have racist people investigating the crime. Mm-hmm. I know you don't like them, so I want you to investigate. Do what you need to do to bury them, mm-hmm. right? So was I happy that he got found out guilty? No, because somebody was murdered. Two people were murdered. Mm-hmm. But what I was happy about is the fact that racist people weren't able to use that racism, mm-hmm. that authority, that power to find somebody guilty of something that all they had to do is present the evidence. Mm-hmm. All they had to do was their job. Mm-hmm. So in retrospect, what I'm saying is all we're asking for is equality. We want to be treated the same.
Mhm.
So in the case of O.J. Simpson, had they treated him just like they treated Rittenhouse, he probably would have got found guilty,
Mhm.
right? The evidence supported the guilty verdict. But that didn't happen.
Mhm.
When we talk about the Rittenhouse case in particular, the judge did some things that I thought was unprecedented.
He
right?
was the defense attorney.
So you can't call victims victims. You have to call them rioters and looters,
Mhm.
which defames the victim. That usually doesn't happen.
Mhm.
There was no precedents that make that warranted,
Mhm.
right? So when we look at this case, it just was not handled equally to if it was a black defendant.
Mhm. And that's what African Americans was saying. And a lot of people are confused about what racism actually is. You know, people create what they think racism is. Racism is more than just somebody not liking a black person or somebody
That's right.
that calling somebody a name. Racism is an action, and it's an action within our judicial system that a lot of people won't see. But when we look at, you know, the killing and the silencing of our black leaders, it's something that's been going on for a long time. And, you know, black activism has been looked at for whatever reason as a potential national security threat. This is something that J. Edgar Hoover was always saying, that, you know, a lot of these black leaders were a threat to national security. You know what a threat to national security is called? It's actually called terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
You know what the definition of terrorism is? I'm going to give it to you. A person who uses unlawful violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. That doesn't sound like Frederick Douglass to me.
No.
Doesn't sound like W.B. Du Bois to me. Definitely doesn't sound like Dr. King. And I know what y'all waiting on. It sounds like Malcolm X. Malcolm X was an advocate of self-defense. So you never heard of Malcolm X going out killing people.
That's right.
What it doesn't describe Huey Newton or Fred Hampton, who also was an advocate of self-defense. That word's going to continue to come up in this podcast because that's what y'all were saying in the comments, self-defense. But you know what it does sound like. Slave masters, the KKK, neo-Nazis, LAPD.
That's right.
It sounds like what happened on the Red Summer of 1919. It sounds like what happened at the Tulsa Massacre of 1920. It sounds like what happened at Selma. It sounds like what happened with Dylann Roof. It sounds like what happened at the Capitol.
That's right.
That's what true national security threat is. But when you hear the word threat, it's always targeted towards the African American, especially when it comes to national security. That means you are threatening white supremacy's way of thinking.
That's right.
And that's a problem in America. Has nothing to do with nothing else other than race. We know that FBI targeted African Americans under J. Edgar Hoover because he wanted to stop what they called the Black Messiah. And he wanted, and in words, it says, I want to prevent the rise of a Messiah who could unify and electrify black people that would disregard white command or white supremacy, white superiority.
That's right.
The truth is too much. The truth can be too much for white America to try to grasp because the disrespect has become generational to generational. And anybody who has benefited from that do not want to let go of that privilege. And that's one thing that we're seeing in these comments. I'm seeing people comment on everybody's status, the latest on Facebook. And you only go to that much lengths, as we talked about on the last day, the lengths that people will go to cover up their own insecurities.
That's right.
Is because you are trying to protect something. What are you trying to protect? Your patriotic duty?
No.
If we talk about patriotic, if we talk about American principles, we go back to how it was developed. And if you want to throw that word 1776 out there, cool, I'll let you use it.
That's
but
right.
what the hell was black people in 1776?
That's right. That's right.
Silencing is when you use phrases like Black Lives Matter and you come back and say, no, all lives matter. Blue lives matter. It's creating that type of silencing for anything somebody says that disregards your own belief system of white superiority. That's telling us that you don't tell us what matters. We'll tell you what matters. We create the narrative. That is silencing African American leaders that's silencing all African Americans to create that unification
That's right.
and that electrifying unity that J. Edgar Hoover did not want to happen. And now you're seeing the babies of those people that were silencing standing up, and everybody has a media platform to speak out for themselves. We'll take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. And we are back. If you go to YouTube, type in the Mighty Motivation Network, you can catch up on all the latest episodes. If you go to Facebook, type in My Unapologetic Perspective, you can catch up on all the latest details happening in the African American diaspora. Let's continue on and move forward. The question of why are people afraid of black people talking about history and racism?
Well, hold on, babe. I want to read something real quick. It's a poem from Layla Saad. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce the last name or not, but I know my black people they really gonna feel this one. It says, "I'm tired of defending my humanity. I'm tired of debating the truth of my lived experiences." Sound like much what y'all did this week on Facebook. I'm tired of not being able to speak my mind without fear of retribution.
Yep.
I'm tired of injustice and discrimination. I'm tired of having to be twice as good and 2 steps ahead just to fucking live. I'm tired of having to be the strong one, the resilient one, the one who acts better than she's being treated. I'm tired of screaming that I'm being hurt and being punished for it while my abusers are protected and enabled. I'm tired of being tired. Absolutely. I'm so damn tired.
Now, when you hear that, where's your mind going to? Give me your analysis of that.
For me, it's like she said, we always got to be twice as good and 2 steps ahead. For women, they got to be 3 times as good, 3 times step ahead. Because black women got it the hardest in this country. Whether it's sports, they get paid the least to do the same thing that the male athletes do. Far as teachers, far as if you're working in the nursing field. And then for black men, I think about my son when he's with me, and it goes back to one of my favorite quotes by you, 2 different Americas. When he's with me, he's in one America. When he's with his mom, he's in a whole different America. Because we live 2 different lives in 2 different counties. But what I get from this is black people, they're fed up. They're tired. And the end sound like a black mom. I'm tired of being tired, and I'm so damn tired. So tired of explaining that we are mistreated in this country. So tired of explaining that when it comes to these laws, they're not for us. The court system is not for men and it's not for black people.
Absolutely. You know, when we look at why people are so afraid of black people speaking out and the history about racism, about oppression, about injustice, I think every episode now has just been talking about this because like it's just something that never gets old. It's just something that's just been constant. Because next week it'll be something else, you know, and the week got to be something else. Like it doesn't
have plenty
stop.
of opportunities to talk about it because it's going to continue to happen because you have so many people who still refuse to believe that it exists. And I can't. I'm not white, so I can't say whether they really believe that or not. But I think it's more about from the perspective that you talked about that they feel threatened. Their privilege is being threatened, and when you threaten somebody's privilege, they want to try to stop it. And I think that's what they're doing. So they downplay the extent of racism and discrimination in this country. And I have a hard time with the people that do that because they're not the ones being discriminated against. Right. You can't tell me when I've been discriminated against enough and you can't talk about it anymore because if I'm being discriminated against, I can talk about it whenever I want.
Or when they tell you to get over it.
Yeah. And I know you want to get into this, but it brings up the point of what you had the commentator say about LeBron James. Shut up and dribble. And people say, well, what's the problem with professional athletes speaking out about this? Well, the problem is that they have a huge audience.
Yeah, that's the thing.
It's very impactful when you have these folks come out and talk about these type of things, because obviously that's how you get change. Is that one, people have to know what's going on, and they have to have people that's standing up for it. And then from there, you can institute change. They don't want athletes doing that. So when you hear LeBron James came out, a few years ago and talked about it, I think her name was Lori something.
Laura Ingram.
Yeah.
Like
said, shut up and dribble. And you said the same thing when people like Mookie Betts spoke out and
Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah, Colin Kaepernick and a couple other African American players. However, when Brett Favre spoke out about it, there was nobody telling him to shut up.
Brian
Urlacher. Drew Brees.
Yeah.
There was nobody telling them to shut up and just play
Shut
or
up
whatever.
and throw the ball.
It's only when there was a black voice that people felt like they should shut up and just dribble. Even ESPN made a change in their format to where they did not want the commentators and analysts talking about social events. You know what happened? Those people continue to talk about social events, even if they had to go to a different network, because you can't stop the power. You can change the platform, but you can't stop the power. We have to continue to talk. Yes, and for people that are like me and 50 and older, I'm talking about Public Enemy. Fight the power. You have to fight the power. And you fight the power the best way you can. And most of the time, that's by trying to educate other people and talking about things when things happen. And that's what we're trying to do with this podcast.
Right. And, most people say, that, LeBron James and all of them are influencing other people. That's true. But they're influencing people from their millions of followers. But you have to understand that those are human beings, that they're influenced by our thoughts. They watch the people that we watch, listen to the people that we listen to, and they come up with our theories and put it on a $1 million platform, a million view platform, and they're speaking out for black people. So when you see this, you're trying to say that they're influencing us, but really we influencing them because they have a platform to be able to get our message out to the masses. So people hate that because they don't want to see, again, to electrify the black community. You don't want to try to electrify the black community, because the more African Americans speak up, the more African Americans will educate themselves outside of that subordinate box. The more African Americans will wake up out of that turn the other cheek, just go pray about it, give it time mentality. It's not a threat to national security. It's a threat to privileged security, entitled security, racial security. And when you threaten someone with control over a people for 400 years, what are they going to do besides fight or flight?
That's right.
And you want to try to keep those black peoples as being subordinate as possible and keep us in that box from developing these type of things. And it ain't just athletes. If you look at the other murder trial that's going on right now, they don't even want Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson in the courtroom because they have influence of the black community, because you don't want them to use their platform to wake up the rest of black America to say, hey, this is something that we need to get on board with. This is why we talked about this on the previous episode. This is why you have not really seen one black leader, is because they try to manipulate and separate that ever since J. Edgar Hoover. You don't want a black leader. You don't want one person to look to say, okay, this is what we need to do. You want to keep that separated, segregated, and divided as much as you can. And this is something that's been going on throughout history, as silencing that African American leader. From Frederick Douglass, I know a lot of Republicans love Frederick Douglass, but believe me when I tell you that Frederick Douglass had to do a lot of his writings from London.
That's right.
He couldn't write some of that stuff and stay in the United States. Sojourner Truth, we talk about this on the podcast. They didn't want her to speak. They wanted her to just be there. W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, Marcus Garvey, Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, Dr. King, Fannie Lou, Huey Newton, all up to now. None of these people were liked in their lifetimes. I know y'all love Dr. King now. I know y'all like the Dr. King Day, the birthday. He was the most hated man in America when he was alive.
That's right.
So don't talk to me about some of these leaders that you want to talk about now, because during their lifetime, when they were speaking out, when they were speaking about in the present, they weren't liked about America. So you can't get mad when people speak out against ideologies that you go against. And I think the difference now is that people can't escape listening. You didn't have to read Frederick Douglass' newspaper. You didn't have to read Ida B. Wells in the newspaper. You didn't have to read. You didn't have to watch Dr. King and his servant. You didn't have to hear about that. But you know what happens now? That whatever school you go to, there's a spirit of W.E.B. Du Bois talking about how we need to educate the black kids. There's a spirit of Dr. King in whatever job you go to talking about the lack of diversity and talk about how black people need to have fair promotions. Facebook posts are full of Marcus Garvey spirits talking about how we need to educate people in black business, promote black businesses. And now you're seeing all of these black entrepreneurs coming out.
That's right.
Wherever you go to a rally or march, there's a spirit of Ida B. Wells talking about we ain't putting up with this mess. And when you can't escape that if you're white America, because you're working alongside of these people. You're in the school board with these people. You're at the basketball, football games with these people, and you can't escape listening to it, and they can't take that much truth because you are forced to listen to it. That's the reason why they didn't want to desegregate, is because now you have to hear this all the time. Racist America, you can't hide from it. Everywhere you go, there's going to be talking about racism because it still exists. You may not want to admit it, but it still exists. And I feel like a lot of people don't understand when it comes to admitting that. See, recovery have a 12-step program. And I'm not going to go through all the 12 steps. I'm going to just give you the first step. Admitting.
That's right.
That's all. Admit your powerlessness. So a lot of people don't even want to admit that it's a racist control factor. That's right. Because if you have to admit it, then I got to have accountability for it. And if I have accountability for it, then I got to take action for it. That's right. So we're going to exclude the last two because I don't even want to admit it. So you don't want to take accountability when you take slavery out of textbooks. Because if you have to admit that, then we have to take accountability of all the things that were placed amongst the slaves. And we have to take accountability in the mirror of that our ancestors may not have been heroes. Right. You don't want to take accountability because you have to give that, because you want to give that token black person, black case, black success and say, look what we did for them. We can do this for you. You don't want to take accountability, so you do that to say, look, racism doesn't exist. You don't want to take accountability because we gave you Juneteenth Day to celebrate, even though if you go ask the average white person, what is Juneteenth? They ain't going to know what it is. That's right. You ask the average black person, they don't know what it is. So Juneteenth you gave us, but you ain't celebrating it. You waiting on the 4th of July. That's right. So when you don't know what history is, you will never see how the judicial system, political system, educational system, economic system was designed for white supremacy. And if you don't understand these things, and you don't admit these things, you don't take accountability of these things, you're never going to have change in America, because there are people who still confuse the word racism and they say that is not racism. So now we have that's not racism police. So what you mean to tell me is what you can do is I can go on everybody's Facebook status and say, that's not racism. But something that's blatantly racist, I don't see y'all talking about it. So I'll stand up against it to just disprove that that's not racism, but I won't stand up for it when I see it. That's so right. The same people who said that Cal Rittenhouse was not a racist situation, you didn't post anything about Ahmaud Arbery. You didn't post anything about George Floyd. You didn't post anything about Trayvon Martin. You didn't post anything about Breonna Taylor. You didn't post anything about all the places where it was probably blatantly racist. You didn't stand up for it. So you're only the police when you're trying to disregard that it's not about race. That's right. That's it.
And they, I think, again, on the Rittenhouse situation, I think a lot of people are misinformed about what most black people are saying. Mm-hmm. Whether Rittenhouse was racist or not is irrelevant. Right. We're not even talking about him. Right? We're talking about the treatment that he got because of his white privilege. Mm-hmm. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about him and what he did or did not do. What we're saying that if the roles were reversed, if it was a black defendant, would he have gotten the same treatment? Mm-hmm. And we say no. That's what we're saying. And the thing is it's precedented. As Baker said, it's precedented. This is what this country does. We can even go back, you know, and we talk about this, but there was another case that happened earlier in the week, Julius Jones,
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
On death row for 20 years for a crime that he says he didn't commit, and evidence support that. Another guy, co-defendant, who was convicted of the same crime, said that he actually lied. He committed the crime, and he swore to this. He committed the crime and framed Julius Jones.
Yeah.
The guy's name is something Jordan.
And the two other co-defendants said that he actually planted the blood in his house. And did all this other stuff.
Absolutely. And all of this was told under oath to law enforcement. You go get a brother, just so people know, Julius Jones was a college student, right? You go get a brother who's trying to do something with himself, and now you've put this murder on him and put him on death row for 20 years, right? So, and in hindsight, so of course, everybody loves the fact that the governor came in and said, okay, we're going to take death penalty off the table. Even though the parole board had already voted 3-1, I think it was, to give him life with the possibility of parole, which means he would almost been eligible immediately for parole. The governor not only goes in and says, no, we're going to commute the death sentence, life in prison, without the possibility of parole. So, again, if he had been white, would this have happened? Any of it. Even from the framing all the way up to what the governor did. Would this have happened if he was white? Precedent says no. Let's just talk about one quick thing. The death penalty in itself, a lot of people don't know why that came about. The death penalty was the government's solution to lynchings.
Yeah.
Lynchings. That was the government's solution. We're going to create something, because before that, most of lynchings were committed by mobs. Right. Not by law enforcement, but by mobs. And they did it on the courthouse lawn.
Yeah.
So we can clearly see how this creates the narrative for how black people view the justice system. So when you go to a courthouse, what do you think? I'm going to be treated unfairly. Before 2020, when you went to a courthouse, you usually saw some statue, some remnant that will put you in a certain place in history.
Yeah.
Put you in that box before you even went into the courthouse, right? When you go to museums, there was usually a remnant on the entrance that puts you in a certain place.
Yeah.
So as you go in and view American history, I want you to know where your place is in history.
Yeah.
So you got these images early on before you did anything. So you come up with capital punishment for the criminal. And we know, disparately, who is most affected by that. But that's not the death penalty. But people who have been wrongly convicted and executed.
Yeah. And then exonerated after
the fact. Right? So for people that don't believe that racism exists, what country do you live in? Because I want to go there. Right? Because it ain't America. Yeah. All right? And for the people that say, well, if you're unhappy, go back to Africa. I ain't from Africa. I was born in Washington, D.C. All right? I was born in Washington, D.C. And we just want to show you guys the narrative of how you continue to try to place us in a certain spot in this country. So even after slavery, what do? You create Jim Crow laws, right? You do all these things to keep us from being equal to you.
Right.
Even when the law says we can vote, you want to kill people for going to vote, which you did. And you wanted to stop people from voting, which you did. And the government, who knows we have a right to vote, didn't help us. Yeah. So the whole civil rights movement was not to get something that we didn't already have. It was to be able to practice what we already had. So again, white America, we don't want more than what you have. We just want to be treated fairly. Yeah. That's all we want. As James Brown said, we just want our share. That's all we want. And we can't get that because privileged thinking, white supremacy still reigns in America.
We're going to take a quick commercial break and we'll be right back. And we are back. Again, go to YouTube, type in Mighty Motivation Network, catch up on all the latest episodes. Go to Facebook, type in My Unapologetic Perspective, catch up on all the African-American history among this diaspora. We're going to continue right back in because, I think a lot of people are confused, again, with the word racism. There are people who are now calling black people racist, which I don't believe can be true because black people don't affect any white person's ability to create economic success, create educational success, to create political success. I believe the word racism is an action. It is how people act towards things to keep a certain group of people into that subordinate box that we talked about. So saying that black people are racist for wanting a white conviction is incorrect. It may be biased because we want you to have the same type of treatment that we get. You know what I'm saying? So that is something
definitely biased, but the reason why I don't think black people can be racist is because we don't have enough power.
Exactly.
We don't have enough money.
Racism is a control. When you go back and look at where racism first comes into play in America, it's the first thing that is put on the law books in anywhere in the world about black and white. It's to keep black people, again, in that subordinate position that we talked about. So when you look at the word racism, it's not just the slave master calling a black person a nigger. It's calling the person a nigger to make you understand what your place is in this world, right. Which means you don't control anything that's happening right now.
That's right.
You do what I say. That is an action. That is not a noun. Does not just describe a person, place, or thing. It is an action that creates that subordinates that we talked about. So I hate it when people say that, the things that we talk about may be racist. No, it's pro-black. Pro-black does not mean anti-white.
That's right.
I'm talking about the things that white America normally don't want to listen to. When we say word white America, I know I have white friends who are not racist.
Right.
But what we're talking about is the masses of white people who still practice this without acting on it. Again, we talked about it a few episodes ago. There's a difference between being a non-racist and an anti-racist. Mm-hmm. I could care less about a non-racist because you sit around racist people and allow stuff to happen. Mm-hmm. We can't be friends if you do that.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? I'm with the anti-racist people who, again, speak up about racism, even if it don't concern them and it doesn't affect them generally. So if my white friend say, hey, you can't do that, that's racist. Ain't got nothing to do with him. He's not affected by it, but you're speaking about it because you see that somebody that you call a friend is affected by it. And I think that's the problem with white America is they don't listen to what black people say. So I hate it when people say you're causing division by speaking out about racism. Here's my question. When has this country ever been united? Matter of fact, we should just call it the division states of America.
That's right.
Because it has never been united. And for the white people who saying, well, 1776, again, we could talk about what black people was in 1776. You can't even say September 12, 2011, because there are a lot of Muslims that were African American who practiced Islam who were ridiculed about what happened on September 11th, 2001. So you're not going to find no place in America, in American history, where there was unity. So we are attempting to have a real conversation, not sweep things under the rug. We're talking about truth so you can understand how we feel, but also understand how we respond to things. We don't need you to listen to respond. We need you to listen to understand.
That's right.
Now, I know you can never understand the black point of view. That's why I don't take time to argue with some of y'all, because you will never understand the black experience. I had a guy tell me, you can't have a conversation without being emotional about it. You damn right I can't. You know why? Because you ain't dealt with what my ancestors had to deal with. You can't talk about the Revolutionary War without getting emotional. You know why? Because you are related to that in a sense of your ancestors. Why do you expect me not to be emotional about the things that happen to black people? I'm black.
That's right.
The hell are you talking about? So when we speak, here's the new one. Y'all allowing the media to speak for you. The hell are you talking about? Do you realize that in the history that black people had to create their own media outlet because white America would not talk about the things that black people were talking about? When we speak on this podcast, it's not CNN, it's not Fox, it's not MSNBC, it's not ABC 13, it's not any of those places. We are intelligent enough to speak for ourselves. So even when you say the media is speaking for you, you are putting blacks in a position that we can't think for ourselves.
That's right.
Do you not understand that what the media takes, ESPN is a perfect example, they take black thoughts and use it for their platform to create more people watching. What they are saying on that show, what they are saying on Fox News, they hear from black people all the time. And they talk about it because it will bring more viewers of black people to their platform because it's how the fuck we feel.
That's right.
What are you talking about? You mean to tell me black people don't know how they feel when we've dealt with what we've dealt with? The media do not speak for us. We control our own narrative.
Absolutely.
Can't nobody else tell me what to think. Can't nobody else tell me how I should feel about a situation involving a black person when it's clearly racist to me?
That's right.
The hell are you talking about?
That alone is another form of racism and oppression, is to try to speak for us. I hate when people say, that's not racism. Here's the thing. How many black people have you heard chime in and say that's not racism? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you always have people that's on the winning side, right, of racism say that that's not racism, right? So when the cops beat the hell out of Rodney King on national TV and took breaks in between, that wasn't racism?
Mm-hmm.
What was it? When have we seen them beat a white person like that?
Yeah.
Right? So when people talk about, well, okay, what are we doing? When we talk about the narrative that white people created or white America created. Ida B. Wells, one of your favorite,
Yes.
wrote, the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So obviously, we want white America to face the truth. And the way that you face the truth is you got to go back to history.
Mm-hmm.
And you start there. Be honest with when black people first was in America. It supersedes 1619. We know that.
Yeah.
Right? You know that. Stop playing. Right? So let's be honest about that. And then let's be honest about 1619 when blacks were enslaved and brought to this country. Let's be honest about that. Let's be honest about how the biggest issue with slavery wasn't just the sale or enslaving. It was the fact that it went for generations. It was the fact that you deprived them of education. So when you watch Roots and they're talking to Kunta Kinte and they're saying, grits, dummy, grits.
Yeah.
It's not that he was an idiot. He didn't speak English.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have a language barrier. So because you didn't understand the language and they didn't understand your language, you perceived them as being an idiot.
Yeah.
When in fact, you was the idiot.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So even after slavery, the first thing you want to do is create laws to once again make blacks subordinate in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And you did that successfully through Jim Crow laws and a lot of other laws that we know about, right? So let's go present day. So what do? You can't necessarily create laws that are going to put us in that light to that degree, but what you can do is you can create laws to make it a little more difficult for us to own things in communities, including our own vote.
Mm-hmm.
So you make voting restriction laws that affect blacks disproportionately, right? You make stand your ground laws and self-defense laws that clearly does not include black people.
Absolutely.
Right? I've never seen a black person win a stand your ground law case. Okay? In fact, the one case that happened right in the same area that Trayvon Martin, a black lady defending herself against the ex-husband or boyfriend, shot a warning round in the ceiling of her own home, and she got charged. Mm-hmm. Even though the ex-husband testified, yes, I was going to kill that bitch.
Yeah.
Still go to jail. Trayvon Martin's case, Zimmerman goes home.
Right.
Right? So don't tell us it doesn't exist. Don't tell us that racial inequality is of the past. It's happening right now. Mm-hmm. And they're helping it by chiming in saying it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. They are part of it. You said I think on a post yesterday that silence is the new white supremacy.
Or the new racism, is pretending that it doesn't exist, or telling people it doesn't exist, that the people that got to experience it every day.
Absolutely. And that's what's continuing to happen. That's how it continues to happen. People say, well, how does it continue to happen at that level? It's because you have so many people on the privileged side that feels threatened. Now, I don't know what it is about black people that white people feel threatened about. I don't know, but I'll give you a case. In Minnesota, I don't know his first name, but his last name was Moore. He was an African Muslim police officer. And a lady called and said that she heard a noise in the alley. So 2 police officers show up. There's 1 black officer in the passenger seat, white officer in the driver's seat. And when they pull up, they hear some trash can rumbling. So the black officer, fires a shot. And this white lady appears and she's been shot. His bullet hits her. He was charged immediately, fired and charged immediately, found guilty. And in the hearing, the prosecutor said, well, what happened? And he says, well, I felt threatened. He said, you felt threatened by a blonde white lady. What's threatening about that? So let's put this in real perspective, America. What that means is you should never feel threatened by a white person. That's what that means. So if you should never feel threatened by a white person, what's the opposite? Feel threatened by a white person. That's the terminology used by most officials in this country and has been so for many, many years. So when we talk about being threatened, we fit the profile. We talked about this before too. You fit the description. You're black. The victim was white. You're guilty. Simple as that. And that's been the narrative, and it continues. And it's not going to stop. What we're doing right now is hopefully informing people so that they can try to make a difference in their lives and their communities, right? But overall, I don't think the difference will be seen by me. I'm 52 years old. I don't know if the difference is going to be seen because you have people like Donald Trump ran for president and decided based on that there's millions of people in this country that still think the way that we're talking about today. And the minute that he ran for president and won, states said, you know what? We don't need Donald Trump anymore. We can pass our own laws now. We got it. Look at Texas. Look at Virginia, right here in this state. Look at what's happening right now. You had the lieutenant governor, and we're just going to mention this real quick. We had a lieutenant governor who's black, and everybody went, yes, we got a black lieutenant governor. And she says, her first statement is, I'm going to give more money to HBCUs, right? Everybody went, yes, yes. But I don't think racism is an issue. I want to get away from it being white and black. Did she contradict herself?
Yes, she did.
She contradicted herself, but she contradicted herself for a reason. The reason is I'm going to give more money to HBCUs because I want more black students to go there. I don't want you going to UVA. I don't want you going to Virginia Tech. I don't want you going to William and Mary.
Yeah.
Right? Go down to North Carolina A&T. Go to Grambling State. That's where I want you to go. Right? So we can put you in that box that we've been putting you in forever. So you want desegregation? You got it. But now you want desegregated colleges? You got it.
Yeah.
Go to HBCU. Right?
Absolutely.
Same thing. It continues. So it doesn't matter whether you're white or black. It's the narrative. And the narrative continues to put black people in a specific place in America. And it's subordinate. It's inferior to whites. Which means if you have somebody inferior, you have to have somebody that is superior. And white America believes it's them. This country was built on that.
Yes, absolutely. And it's being challenged now. My closing statements is, when we talk about black empowerment, black history, ugly American history, I know it makes white people feel uncomfortable. And ain't nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with feeling uncomfortable sometimes, But it's about how we feel about what we've been through and what we are currently through. And if you have a problem with that, how can you ever call me a friend? That's one thing I don't understand. It's okay when we're doing things that were benefiting you. When we were doing Hoops Kids, when we were speaking and having all the kids, you didn't have a problem with that. But the minute it came to you lending an ear to what's going on in the black community, you fell back. People fell back.
That's right.
And honestly, for me, thank you to the people who did. Because it let me know that you ain't rock with me for me. You rock with me for who you wanted me to be. Going back to that subordinate box that we talked about.
That's right.
You know, I hate it when people say, go to other countries and see how good you have it here. So just because the United States is not as bad economically as other countries, I'm supposed to be quiet about the wrongdoings that goes on here. Understand? I was born here. There's a scene in A Different World where Wayne says, "I was born here. My ancestors fought wars for this country. We helped build this country.
That's right.
On our backs. My children gonna be here. My grandchildren gonna be here. And the first thing that you say to me is, if you don't like it, you should go to a place where it ain't as good." So you're acknowledging the flaws of the country, but saying it ain't as bad as some other places.
That's right.
Now, how dumb does that sound? We're gonna continue to point out the bullshit.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to blacks, there is nothing other countries can do to black people or have for black people that's worse than chattel slavery.
That's right.
I don't care what third world country you go to. I'd rather be broke and hungry than have to experience chattel slavery the way my ancestors did.
Absolutely.
And listen, I don't expect everybody to agree with us. This is why we call it the unapologetic perspective. And I'm not against people who disagree with me. There's a couple of friends, they know we disagree all the time. And we shake hands and say, you know what? I respect your perspective. That's it. Because they may not fully get where I'm coming from, and I don't fully get where they coming from, and that's all right. But I get mad when people who expect African Americans to stop referring to history when it keeps repeating itself.
Absolutely.
You want to give me the date? I know what today's date is. What that got to do with anything? As if it still isn't repeating stuff. We can go back and we can compare Emmett Till to Trayvon Martin.
That's right.
The word self-defense has been used by white America as a justification, but when blacks use it, it's still called violence. We can go back to Malcolm X. We can go back to the Black Panther Party for that. We can go back to Lena Baker in 1945 again. For killing a white man who kidnapped and assaulted her. She claimed that she had been shot in she claimed that she shot him in self-defense. You know what they did? They executed her and then exonerated her a few years ago. Right. We watched Brooke Richardson, Ohio 2019, kill her child. Got probation. Mm-hmm. And then you want to talk to me about Kyle Rittenhouse? Are we serious? For the people, as I say in the comments now gonna come in. If you know history, you know what we talking about. That's if right. You do not know history, if you talking about that K through 12 bullcrap that they gave you in civics and social studies and American history, you referring to that, you don't know history.
That's right.
Don't talk to me about I guess the new word, well, we know even before Dr. Queen, whenever black people start talking about equality, white people bring up communism. You only bring up communism when black people start talking about equality. So, have fun with that.
Your closing remarks, Shaquan.
I just want to say rest in peace, young Dolph. As black people, we got to hold other black people accountable. He was gunned down in Memphis, your favorite state. He was gunned down in Memphis by two other black men in his hometown at an all black establishment that he frequents to promote their business so they can get more customers. He was gunned down. The sad part is this shit ain't gonna stop. Nipsey Hussle was gunned down in his own hood by another Crip. And all Nip was doing was somebody that got out of jail, he was giving them free clothes from his store. As black people, like I said, we just got to hold each other accountable. And that's what we do on here. We don't just talk about, the racist white people, but we talk about the black people as well.
Yep, we talk about our own problems.
That's right.
Yeah, so rest in peace to Dolph. Prayers to his family. But, like I said, for some reason, this shit ain't going to never stop. Blacks going to always keep killing black.
I'm gonna end with this. America has to own this role that they continue to try to place Black Americans in. They have to own it. And the reason I say that is because they created it, right? So if you look at the Declaration of Independence that they wrote, there was no mention of slavery in the Declaration of Independence. Why? Because they didn't want Britain to know that it was going on and that it was basically a part of the culture. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to protect slavery. They wanted it for themselves. Prior to the Declaration of Independence, they blamed Britain for slavery, saying that the king wanted them to go bring slaves to the country to help build the country. But yet in the Declaration of Independence, they didn't mention it. Why? They knew it was wrong. They knew it was wrong, but they wanted to harbor it. They needed it. It was important to the building of this country, and they needed it. So they didn't include it in the Declaration of Independence. And then as time go on and you read more and more, and you have the Constitution and you have all these bills of rights and you have all these things that came about, they mention us as human beings. Where they could have said we were animals, right? They could have deemed Black people as being animals and not included them at all in the conversation. But why didn't they? Because we are human beings. The only thing is they don't believe that we're equal to them. So they had to have a way to say that we're not equal, even though they already missed that part because they said all men were created equal. How do we go back and fix that? We can't. We can't go back and fix it. So all we can do is try to appease Black America by giving you a few things, right?
Progress.
So that's what they give you. But you made a point, an excellent statement earlier about precedents. And when we talk about precedents, we're not just talking about previous court cases. We're talking about precedents in a whole. The precedence was already set of where you wanted us to be in America. And that narrative continues. I'm going to read a quote. We were once told by virtue, our bondage, that we could never be American. But it was by that virtue of our bondage that we became the most American of all. So white America, where you try to say that we're not American and we're not equal as you, we fought in the same wars that you fought in. We built this country. This country was built on our backs, literally built on our backs. So when you say we're not American, everything that you say about what America is who we are. And the fact that we're standing up and talking about these situations, we're trying to hold your truths to be self-evident. We're trying to help you prove your point. There was no democracy until we made it one. Without us, there is no democracy. So Black people made this country a democracy. So what we're doing is a part of that which you said we were. This country was going to be. We're holding you accountable for that. So at some point, you're going to have to admit it. Because you already have, just in your writings alone, you've already admitted. So come on, come clean and back up and support what you say you are, what this country is supposed to be.
Absolutely. I'm gonna say one more thing. I Too by Langston Hughes. I Too sang America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. You silenced my ancestors. But through that, we've grown.